"This account won't stay hers for long," Thomas said, his voice sharp but calm. The kind of calm that hides cruelty. "Just transfer it quietly. She won't even know it's gone." The words floated through the half-open door, soft enough to sound harmless, heavy enough to change everything. For a moment, I thought I misheard. Then came his smirk, that dry, self-satisfied exhale through the nose. I'd heard it before years ago, when he told me not to worry about small financial matters. My hand froze on the doorknob. The teapot trembled against the saucer, a thin ring of sound in the stillness. I wasn't supposed to hear this. I was just bringing out the coffee, like every Thursday evening, when my daughter and her husband came by for what they called their check-in. I used to think it was kindness. Now it sounded like an audit. He went on, his tone low but certain. "The woman's old. She won't last another year in that house. It's too big for her. It's time we handled the estate before things get messy." My daughter didn't interrupt. Maybe she nodded. Maybe she looked away. Either way, silence became agreement. That silence broke something inside me. I'd spent 70 years believing loyalty meant love, that family meant protection, that a mother's kindness came back to her somehow, maybe not in words, but in gratitude. Instead, my own blood sat in my dining room discussing my death like a budget plan. I stepped back from the door, every breath measured, every step careful. The tray was still in my hands, the coffee cooling, the sugar bowl rattling faintly against the porcelain. I wanted to scream, to storm in and demand an explanation. But instead, I did what women like me were taught to do. I smiled through storms, and I served the coffee anyway. When I entered, Thomas didn't even look up. My daughter glanced at me, gave a quick, "Thanks, Mom," and went back to stirring her cup. The smell of roasted beans filled the room, but everything tasted like betrayal. I sat across from them quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching their eyes avoid mine. They spoke about stair lifts, renovations, insurance policies, all the gentle words that hide cruel intentions. Thomas laughed once, lightly, about how some people just don't know when to let go. He didn't notice the way my jaw tightened, or the way my burned palm pressed into the table until it hurt. I'd once believed my daughter married a man who would take care of her. Now I realized she'd married a man who'd learned to calculate love in dollars. When they left that night, I stood by the window and watched their taillights fade into the dark. The pie I'd baked sat untouched on the counter. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the reflection in the glass, a woman they thought was too gentle to fight back, too old to understand the papers she'd signed. They were wrong. Because that night, under the same roof they planned to steal, I made a promise, not to them, not even to myself, but to the woman I used to be. The one who'd built this house brick by brick, who'd buried a husband, raised a child, and learned that silence can be a weapon if held long enough. And as the clock ticked past midnight, I whispered it out loud. They think I won't notice. They think I won't understand. But they have no idea who they're dealing with. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because of fury, the kind that hums quietly beneath your ribs like a wire pulled too tight. Every tick of the old clock sounded like a reminder that I'd trusted people who now sat in my dining room plotting my disappearance from my own life. When dawn finally broke, I was still in my chair, still holding the same cold cup of coffee. By morning, my decision had ripened into clarity. I walked to the study, the one room in this house that still smelled like my late husband's aftershave and lemon polish, and opened the bottom drawer. That's where I kept everything that ever mattered. Our deed, the insurance papers, old tax returns, my will. The drawer that had always meant safety now felt like betrayal waiting to be confirmed. The folder was there, neat, organized, and heavier than usual. Inside it, I found a new document I didn't remember signing, trust transfer authorization. My name sat at the bottom in perfect cursive. Only, the loops were wrong, slightly tighter than mine, the signature pressed with more pressure. At first glance, anyone would believe it. Anyone except me. Attached to it was a letterhead from Thomas's firm, smooth legal language twisting truth into courtesy. For estate simplification and tax efficiency, the words blurred as I read. My throat tightened. There was another sheet, one labeled Anticipated End-of-Life Allocation. I had to stop reading halfway through. The clause described my assets in future tense, like I'd already stopped existing. I sat back slowly, breathing through the ache that bloomed behind my ribs. My daughter's handwriting appeared in blue ink on the margin, a note to herself. Mom approved, June. June. The month she came over with flowers and a smile, telling me it was just routine paperwork. I remembered signing that day. I remembered her laughter when I asked if it was complicated. Just a few tax details, Mom, she said. Thomas knows what he's doing. I had believed her. That realization hurt more than any forged document. Because forgery is a crime, but betrayal is a wound that doesn't stop bleeding. I closed the folder, my hands shaking, but not from weakness, from restraint. I could have called her, demanded an explanation, screamed down the phone. But yelling would have given them power. Instead, I chose silence. The kind of silence that gathers strength like thunder behind the clouds. I went to the kitchen and poured myself another coffee, this time in the chipped cup, the one that had survived years of drops and cracks. It had scars like me, but it still held together. I stared out the window at the garden my husband once tended, rows of roses leaning toward the light. He used to say, "People think roots make you weak. They don't. They make you steady." That's when I decided I would not uproot myself to fit their plan. They could scheme, forge, whisper, but I'd learn every clause, every number, every loophole. They'd made one mistake. They underestimated the woman they were trying to erase. That evening, I went through every drawer, every folder, and every envelope in the house. I took notes. I circled dates. I found 3 more documents with Thomas's signature printed neatly at the bottom, a power of attorney, a financial directive, a property amendment. Each one reeked of confidence, the kind of arrogance that assumes old women can't read fine print. When the clock struck midnight again, I felt lighter, not safer but sharper. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness preparing for battle. In that moment, I understood something painful and liberating. Love built this house, but trust no longer lived here. And tomorrow I would find out exactly how deep their betrayal went, not with tears, but with proof. The next morning, I put on my wool coat before the sun had even touched the curtains. The air was still heavy with night, but I didn't care. Some mornings don't wait for permission. They demand action. I locked the door behind me, walked down the path, and kept walking until my feet reached the corner where the old bus still stopped twice a day, the one nobody used anymore except me. The ride into town felt slower than usual. I sat by the window, hands clasped around my purse, watching the houses blur into shapes. My reflection stared back from the glass, a woman who had once been gentle, trusting, predictable. Now there was something else in her eyes, something quiet and fierce. When I stepped into the bank, the scent of new paint and cold air wrapped around me. The teller smiled politely, that kind of smile people save for old customers they think are harmless. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" I met her eyes and said, "I need to speak with someone in private. About my accounts." Minutes later, I sat across from a young man whose tie was too tight and whose confidence came from memorized policies. His name tag read Owen. He looked like someone who still thought integrity came easy. He started with the usual pleasantries. I didn't bother returning them. I opened my folder and slid the document across the desk, the one Thomas had forged. "I want you to explain this to me," I said quietly. He adjusted his glasses. "Ah, yes, this appears to be a standard trust authorization. It allows designated trustees to manage your..." "Stop!" My voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "Explain to me how this got signed without my consent." His words stumbled, just slightly. Well, ma'am, it does bear your signature. It does. A very good imitation of it. I leaned forward. Now, check your system. I want to know if any transfers have been requested from my account. He hesitated, but something in my stare told him hesitation wasn't an option. His fingers moved over the keyboard. After a moment, his tone changed. There was a request. Last week. Pending approval. A transfer of your remaining balances to a managed trust account. My breath slowed. Has it gone through? No, ma'am. It's still under compliance review. Cancel it, I said. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard me correctly. Ma'am, I'd have to confirm. I straightened in my chair. I am the grantor. The owner. The woman with the money. You don't need confirmation. You need instructions. And you just got them. His posture shifted. The politeness in his eyes turned into respect. He nodded slowly. Understood. I'll contact our trust division immediately. I waited as he left the room. On his desk sat a small potted succulent, freshly watered, its leaves catching the thin morning light. It looked alive, well tended. That's what control felt like. Not shouting, not chaos, but quiet precision. When he returned, his tone was careful. It's done. The account's frozen. No transfers will proceed without your authorization. Good, I said. He paused. Would you like to dissolve the trust entirely? Yes, and I'll bring my lawyer tomorrow to handle it. For now, make sure no one touches a cent. Owen nodded. May I recommend adding two-factor authentication to your accounts? We can also set up a verbal password for all phone instructions. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Do it. He spent a few minutes typing, explaining things I already understood, and when it was done, he handed me a printout confirming the freeze. Walking out of that bank, I didn't feel proud. I didn't even feel relieved. I felt awake. The world looked sharper, the air colder, the sound of my heels on the tile floor stronger than it had in years. For the first time, I realized that silence isn't the same as surrender. It can also be strategy. When the bus dropped me back home, the house greeted me with its usual stillness. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine again. I poured a cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the sun creep across the floorboards. Somewhere deep inside, the fear that had once ruled me was gone. They had written me off as fragile. But fragility, I'd learned, can be a disguise. Because sometimes, the quietest people in the room are the ones building the loudest revenge. Why the next morning, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Anger burns fast, but strategy that burns slow and clean. I pulled out my old address book, the one with worn edges and faded ink, and ran my finger down to a name I hadn't needed in years. Linda McGrath. My lawyer. The only person I'd ever trusted with the truth. She'd handled my husband's estate, the zoning battles, the endless paperwork that comes with surviving. Linda wasn't warm, but she was thorough, and that was far more valuable than kindness. She picked up on the second ring. Maven, you're up early. I need to meet you today, I said. What kind of trouble? The kind that wears my daughter's handwriting. There was a pause, then her tone sharpened. 10 o'clock. Bring everything. Her office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same pale blue walls, same ticking clock above the filing cabinets, same faint scent of lemon polish. It felt like stepping into an old chapter I'd left half-read. I placed the folder on her desk and said nothing. Linda didn't ask for context. She simply started reading. Page after page, her brows tightened. When she finally looked up, there was steel in her voice. They've been planning this a while. The trust is structured to look legitimate, triggered by capacity concerns and future medical expenses. Legal, but rotten. Can we undo it? I asked. Yes, she said. But we'll need to file a revocation and challenge the power of attorney. It'll make noise. I've been quiet long enough. Linda nodded once and began typing. Her fingers moved fast, sharp. Each keystroke sounded like justice being rebuilt. You'll need to sign new directives, she said. Financial, medical, durable power, all in your name. Any shared deed will be removed. You decide who gets them this time. I didn't hesitate. Leia, I said. Your granddaughter? Yes. She's the only one who asks how I am without it leading to a favor. Linda's lips softened slightly. Then we'll make sure she's protected too. We worked for an hour, document after document, each one erasing a line of deceit. Every signature I made felt like taking back breath I didn't know I'd lost. When we finished, Linda looked up and said quietly, "Are you sure about cutting your daughter out?" She cut herself out, I replied. I'm just closing the door she left open. When I stepped outside, the air carried that faint metallic scent that comes before rain. I walked the 2 blocks to the florist and bought tulips, yellow ones. George used to bring them home every Thursday for no reason at all. Maybe I'd start bringing them for myself now. I was placing the flowers in a vase when the phone rang. I didn't need to check who it was. Mom, Sadie's voice came through, overly light, the kind of voice people use when they're pretending nothing's wrong. Thomas said you might have misunderstood some things at the bank. Did he? Yes, and I think we should talk before you make decisions you'll regret. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I already made them. Mom, this isn't what you think. Oh, I think it's exactly what I think. You used my trust as your safety net. You turned love into leverage. You made my death your retirement plan. Her silence on the other end wasn't guilt. It was calculation. I could almost hear her choosing which lie to wear next. Finally, she said, "You're overreacting. We were trying to plan for the future." "The future doesn't belong to you anymore," I said. Then I hung up. No shouting, no crying, no justification. Just a click, the clean sound of a chapter closing. I stood there for a long time, staring at the vase of tulips, their petals open toward the light. They didn't ask for permission to bloom. They just did. That's when I realized I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I didn't need to beg for decency from people who'd already sold theirs. I'd spent a lifetime taking care of others. Now it was time to take care of the one person everyone else had overlooked. Me. Tomorrow, I'd sign the final revocation papers and reclaim everything that bore my name. But tonight, I'd reclaim something far more powerful, my peace. I knew they would come. Pride might delay people like Thomas and Sadie, but greed always finds its legs eventually. It was late afternoon when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced. Thomas's rhythm. The sound of someone who thinks the door already belongs to him. I didn't rush. I wiped my hands on a towel, turned off the stove, and walked down the hall at my own pace. When I opened the door, they both stood there, dressed like apologies wearing perfume. Sadie's blouse was pressed, her hair neat, her eyes pretending warmth. Thomas stood half a step behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight with manufactured patience. "Maven," he said, voice syrup-sweet. "Can we come in?" "No." The single word hung between us like a stone dropped in water. Sadie blinked, startled. "Mom, please. We just want to talk." "Then talk," I said. "The porch will do." Thomas shifted his weight, clearly unused to being told where he could stand. "There's no need for this hostility." "There's no hostility," I said calmly. "Only boundaries. Something you both seem unfamiliar with." Sadie's tone cracked. "Why are you doing this?" "Freezing the accounts, changing the deeds, the lawyer, all of it. We were only trying to help you. Help me, I repeated, my voice low but steady. By preparing for my death while I was still pouring you coffee? Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Thomas tried to step forward, the faint smile of a man rehearsed in persuasion. Maven, let's be rational. The trust was legal. Your signature is on every page. And does that make it decent? I asked. Is that what you teach yourselves now, that legality and morality are the same thing? He exhaled, frustrated. You're misinterpreting everything. We were trying to make things easier for you, for everyone. I took one slow step forward, just enough to make him retreat the same distance. By transferring my savings into your private holding account? He didn't answer. Sadie's voice wavered. You weren't supposed to find out like that. We just wanted to. To steal quietly? I cut in. Her face hardened. That's not fair. Fair, I repeated, tasting the word. You spoke of fairness while plotting my absence. You didn't just take my trust and twist it into paperwork. You took my years of forgiveness and used them as a ladder. You climbed over me with clean hands and clever words, thinking I wouldn't feel the weight. Neither of them moved. The air on the porch felt heavy, thick with everything left unsaid. I drew in a breath. I raised you to stand tall, Sadie, not to kneel for convenience. But you let comfort make a coward of you. You married a man who sees value only in things he can own, and somewhere along the way, you let him convince you that included me. Sadie's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Guilt had to fight too hard to get past her pride. Mom, she said quietly, you're turning this into something ugly. It already was ugly, I said. I'm just naming it. I took the envelope from my pocket, a copy of the revocation papers, stamped and sealed, and held it out. This is what your plan earned you. Nothing. You will receive formal notice from my lawyer tomorrow. From this moment on, you have no access, no authority, and no power over my life or what I leave behind. Thomas's jaw twitched. You'll regret this. No, I said softly. You will. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. Then, like all bullies when faced with calm resistance, they broke first. Thomas turned, muttering something under his breath, walking back down the steps with the stiffness of a man unused to losing. Sadie lingered a moment longer. Her eyes searched mine, not for forgiveness, just leverage, and when she found none, she followed him. I closed the door slowly, the latch clicking like a period at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. Inside, the house was silent, but it wasn't empty. For the first time in years, it felt defended. I walked to the window and watched their car pull away, red taillights bleeding into the dusk. Then I turned off the porch light. That small act felt enormous. It meant this chapter of manipulation had ended where it began, at my door. They thought I'd crumble once confronted. They thought I'd fold under guilt. But they forgot one simple truth. I built this home, brick by brick, with hands that never asked permission. And tonight, those same hands finally locked the door for good. After that day, the air in my house changed. The walls didn't echo with betrayal anymore. They hummed with quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't hurt, but heals. Every morning, I made coffee for one, sat by the window, and let the light fall across the floorboards George had sanded decades ago. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for footsteps, calls, or explanations. I was waiting only for peace, and it finally came. It began with small things. I replaced the faded curtains, repainted the porch railing, replanted the roses that had withered under years of neglect. Every brushstroke, every seed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd unknowingly given away. I wasn't just fixing a house, I was rebuilding my own heartbeat. Then one afternoon, a car I knew by sound pulled into the driveway. Leia! My granddaughter. She stepped out, holding a paper bag of groceries and that same determined look I used to have in my 20s. "I brought dinner," she said. "Hope you're hungry." We cooked together, not talking much at first, just moving around the kitchen like we'd been doing it for years. When the pie came out of the oven, she finally said, "Mom's been saying things. To family. To neighbors. She's painting you as the villain." I nodded, not surprised. When people lose control, they rewrite the story. Makes them feel safer. Leia looked up, eyes hardening. "You don't deserve that." "I don't need their approval," I said. "I have my truth. That's heavier than gossip." After dinner, we sat on the porch. The evening air was thick with the smell of jasmine and rain. Leia pulled her knees close to her chest and said quietly, "You know, Grandma, I've been scared to stand up for myself sometimes. But watching you," she paused, eyes glistening, "watching you made me realize I don't have to stay quiet just to be loved." That broke something inside me, in the best way. I reached for her hand. "Don't ever trade your voice for peace, my girl. Real peace doesn't need silence." She smiled through her tears, and for a long moment, we just sat there. Two women bound by blood and defiance, generations apart but cut from the same steel. Before she left that night, she turned at the doorway. "You really are the strongest woman I know." I laughed softly. "No, darling. I'm just a woman who finally remembered she's allowed to keep what's hers." When the house grew quiet again, I walked to my study and opened the new folder Linda had mailed that morning, the one marked Final Revision. Inside were the papers confirming everything. The new trust, the new power of attorney, the deed fully back in my name. Every page carried the weight of justice. Not revenge, but restoration. I signed the last document, closed the folder, and placed it beside the cedar chest where George's letters still rested. I whispered into the stillness, "We're safe now." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and steady. But this time, it didn't sound like danger. It sounded like applause. The storm came quietly that night, not with thunder, but with rain that whispered against the windows. I sat on the porch, blanket around my shoulders, watching the drops fall through the glow of the streetlight. Each one felt like a punctuation mark to the story I'd finally finished. For years, I'd lived believing silence was strength. Now I understood. Silence can heal, but it can also hide wounds that deserve to speak. It had been months since I'd last seen Sadie. Her messages stopped coming. Her voice faded from my answering machine. I didn't chase it. Some distances are necessary, not cruel. Their boundaries dressed as peace. Leia still visited every week, bringing groceries, stories, and laughter that filled corners of the house that had forgotten how to echo joy. One afternoon, she told me she'd found a small office space for her new business. "It's not much," she said, smiling shyly, "but it's mine." I reached across the table, took her hand. "That's the most powerful sentence you'll ever say. It's mine. Hold on to it." When she left that day, I walked through the house one last time before dusk settled. The rooms felt lighter, softer. The weight that had haunted every wall was gone. On the mantel sat a photo of George and me, taken before life taught us that love alone isn't enough, that you also need courage. I touched the frame and smiled. "We did it," I whispered. "It's ours again." Later that night, I opened my old journal, the one I'd stopped writing in when life got too heavy. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "They thought I would fade. But the day I said enough wasn't my ending, it was my beginning." I closed the book and felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The kind that comes from knowing who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The smell of wet soil filled the air. I breathed it in deeply, the scent of survival, of roots that refused to rot. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something simple but sacred. You don't have to be young to start over. You just have to be brave enough to stop disappearing. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that dignity, self-respect, and peace are worth fighting for, then don't keep it to yourself. Backhand index pointing right. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to reclaim their voice, their worth, and their life. Leave a comment below. Tell me one thing you would reclaim if fear didn't stop you. And remember, love builds a home, but dignity keeps it standing. Speech balloon, like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us all. It's never too late to start living on your own terms.